All right, we're going to continue on with our book review of When the Night Comes Falling by Howard Blum. This is now chapter 13. Now, I am trying to speed up the progression of this book just a hair because, again, James Patterson's new book on the Idaho 4 is going to come out in a month or so, and I want to make sure that we're finished with Howard Blum's book by then. It's unfortunate that all the books that are and all the documentaries always have a negative spin. Nobody's coming to the rescue with a book on a positive spin. I need to write that book. That's what I want to do. Actually, I love to write, but anyways, I'm not so dedicated to writing as I should be, and we'll put that aside. The point being is that we're going to get through with Howard Blum's When the Night Comes Falling, and we're going to cover chapter 13. Now, I was going to do multiple chapters, 2 chapters at a time, and I was going to do them a couple of segments a week to try to speed us up. But when we hit chapter 12 last week, there was a huge slowdown because there was just so much in it about that whole corner club thing. And we talked about that in length. Same thing here in a way now with chapter 13. Chapter 13 is taking us through Howard Blum's view of what Bryan Kohberger, because that's who he believed was the killer. Now, you could say this is what he thinks the killer was doing, but he's already identified that he believes Bryan Kohberger is the killer. So in essence, he's telling us this is what Bryan Kohberger did that night. So we're going to go through the details, and the most important part about this chapter is this is Howard Blum's taking us into the mind of the killer. He's not only going to tell us what happened in that house that night, but he's going to tell us what the killer was thinking, which of course Howard Blum has no way to know what the killer's thinking. It's just pure presumption, but he's taking creative license to tell us exactly what Bryan Kohberger was thinking while he was doing the things, what his motivations were, what he was feeling inside as he was killing people, and those kind of things. So keep in mind, there's no way that Howard Blum can know that. I am certain that Howard Blum did not interview Bryan Kohberger, and so this is all his pure conjecture. But does he write it that way? No. Does he say at the beginning, hey, by the way, I'm going to give you what I think happened? No. He just writes it as this is what happened. I want to also point out something as well. Howard Blum was cited, I believe, showed up several times in the latest Dateline NBC hit piece, The Terrible Night on King Road. Howard Blum in that episode had a different story, or I should say Dateline had a different story while featuring Howard Blum as one of their major sources than what is in the book. So what I want to do is I want to read almost every single line. I want to read almost every single line of this chapter. So it's going to slow us down again. We're going to read this chapter in depth because this chapter has so many details about what happened that night, which are, in my opinion, largely conjecture and also largely go against what Dateline NBC with Howard Blum actually said, and the current narrative that constantly changes about what happened that night. And again, I want to point out, a lot of stuff is under a gag order right now, so I'm not sure. Maybe everyone knows, meaning the prosecution and the defense both know that all of this stuff that they're talking about is not what happened, but they're just not allowed to say anything about it right now. But everybody and their dog is conjecturing and coming up with their opinions about what happened, and nobody's correcting them, which is kind of disturbing. Why are they not correcting them? And I want to point out something as well. The reason why I question some of these official narratives is I'm looking at what documents have been released, and I'm also looking, because they are making us clear, what things they are and aren't fighting about pre-trial. So some of these theories to me can't be true because they're not fighting about it in court. Even if they're redacted, you should have an idea by the court documents names some of the things that they're fighting about, and they're not fighting about things that you would expect them to be fighting about if there was more information that we don't know. So that's part of it. They must not know these things because they're not fighting about it. If I was his attorney and I knew certain things about the case, I'd be fighting about that and saying let's have a talk about it, but they're not. So it makes me think anyways, let's get into this. I hope you follow the logic. I'm following the court documents. I'm looking for what kind of things are they fighting about, and what does that tell us about what happened that night. So, and I want to also talk briefly about. I want to talk about 2 things. One, an argument was made about these kind of things, these books and these documentaries, and whether or not that whether it confuses the jury and makes it so that you can't get a fair trial. To someone's credit that said this recently, when the jury gets seated, a book that they read or a documentary they saw 2 years ago about the case isn't going to stick in their mind. And when they start getting into the details, into the weeds in the courtroom, what the prosecution says and the defense says, a lot of what they read and saw in documentaries is going to go right out the window, even if they did see it. So that's fair. To be honest, that's somewhat fair. A lot of what people are going to hear and Howard Blum's take, for example, that's going to be wrong. I'm almost guaranteeing you Howard Blum's take that we're going to read here is going to be wrong. But by the time a jury, even if they had read this book, sits down and hears what's happening in the courtroom, they're going to forget what Howard Blum said. They're going to be focused on the current case. So let's keep that in mind. That is somewhat true. But I also want to point out the one really important thing. It's why this chapter is so disturbing for me. It's called confirmation bias. It's one of the first things I learned in psych courses when I was in high school, before I even started taking college courses. I remember my psych professor in high school so well, and he talked about confirmation bias, and that is that once you have come up with an idea, the mind tends to readily accept anything that supports what it already has come to believe, and tends to reject things that it already has come to reject. And so what that means is when somebody has become convinced that Bryan Kohberger is the killer, then they tend to more readily accept anything that shows that Bryan Kohberger is the killer. And they tend to reject any alternate theories that somebody else could have done it. So while the details of what somebody like Howard Blum says or Dateline NBC says about Bryan Kohberger might be forgotten and not remembered by a jury, the preconceived bias is there. If they've read it and it was a fantastic argument and you're like, oh yeah, that guy did it. I read the book on that. There's no question that guy did it. That's the part that sticks with them, the preconceived bias. And so when you get into the courtroom and they start talking about the details, they're already pre-primed to say, I know Bryan Kohberger is guilty. I read the book on it. And while the details might change, anytime they hear details presented in the courtroom, they're going to be more readily able to accept things that support the belief that they've already come to conclude, which is that Bryan Kohberger is guilty. And they're going to tend to reject things that contradict what they already have come to believe, that Bryan Kohberger is guilty. So again, details don't matter so much. Preconceived bias does. Let's get right into the chapter, because I want to read almost every word of this chapter, and I've already talked for quite a bit of time. I still think we're going to do this under an hour, but we'll see. All right. So, chapter 13, here we go. So now we're talking about Bryan Kohberger the night of the murder, and I don't know that he names him Bryan in here, or if he just refers to it as the killer. I think he says it's Bryan specifically. We know he believes it's Bryan. That is, Howard Blum believes it. And he's talking about the driver, so he just refers to him generically as the driver. The driver cannot seem to find the will to park. Right off the bat, Howard Blum is going to start telling us what the killer is thinking. The driver cannot find the will to park. He's struggling internally with something. There's no way Howard Blum can understand that. There's no way Howard Blum knows what's in the mind of the killer, but he writes it as if he knows what the killer is thinking. Now, yes, he's going to base it on what the prosecution has told us the car did that night, and he's going to come up with the theory. That's what he's done. Why did the car circle the house a bunch of times? Well, in Howard Blum's mind, the killer's working up the nerve to do the killings. That's why he's circling the house. So that's what he's doing, but now he's going to tell us this is what's happening internally in the killer's mind, is he's working up the will, the nerve to kill somebody. So keep that in mind. There's no way Howard Blum can know this. This is him telling you as a fact thoughts and feelings inside the killer's mind without knowing, because he's just basing it on, I'm piecing the story together. And to be fair, I do the same kind of thing. I come up with a theory. What happened? And if that's the case, what would they be thinking? The difference I think between me and Howard Blum is I will tell you, this is why I think it's happening. And if this is the case, if this is what's happening, here's why you would see this. That's the way I word it. Howard Blum doesn't do that. Howard Blum is like, this is what happened. This is what the killer was thinking. I hope you see the difference between the way I present it and the way he presents it. So the driver cannot seem to find the will to park. He needs to stop wavering and hold the idea, the possibility firmly in his mind. Only the driver of the white car is unreconciled. He is not there yet, but he so wants to, because as if summoned, he returns. In other words, he wants to work up the will. This driver wants to do this killing, but he's not quite there yet. So he's going to circle the house a bunch of times because he's not quite there yet. He's ready to kill, but he's just not quite there yet. So he's circling the house, working up the nerve because he's not quite there, ready to kill, but he needs to kill. That's what Howard Blum is going to tell you. Bryan Kohberger needs to kill. It's a compulsion because he's broken. He has to kill, and so he's fighting this internal war between himself. And again, I'm almost afraid to keep telling you this narrative. I'm painting a really vivid picture with my words about what Howard Blum's trying to say, maybe better in some ways than he does, and I should be careful about that. But I want you to understand that's what he's trying to tell you, how Bryan Kohberger is thinking, so that you can feel the emotion behind it. So the white car retraces its earlier route, but apparently he still cannot vault to the place that he wants. He feels he must reach. He can still see other possibilities. Once again, the white car exits the neighborhood. That paragraph or that sentence is important. He still sees other possibilities. In other words, Bryan Kohberger is struggling with, I can still back out. I don't have to kill. I haven't reached the point of no return. I see other possibilities. I could just go home. I could just leave. But Brian's going to keep, in his mind, at this until he leaves himself no other possibilities but to continue and go through with the killings. All right. Yet minutes later, the car returns as if pulled by an invisible force. He needs to find the boldness to act, except he cannot. Once again, the car approaches, only to finally pull away. So, struggle. This is the reason why we see the car circle. And this time, he is determined to stay away. So now Brian's decided, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to leave. This is going to explain to us, in Howard Blum's opinion, why Bryan Kohberger's car, and I want to make it 100% clear. The defense is going to argue you can't even prove that's the same car you see over and over again. The prosecution is going to say, this is suspect vehicle 1 you see, and here it is again, and here it is again, and here it is again. And the defense is going to argue, we know this from pretrial documents, that there is not a continuous footage of this car, and there are other white Elantras, there are other vehicles in the neighborhood, and you can't say the headlights that you see here is for certain the headlights you see here, and keep making in the jury's mind, it's a continuous loop of the same car doing all these things. It could be 5 different cars. It could be 4 different cars. It could be 10 different cars. We don't know, but the prosecution is going to say every time you see the headlights on these cameras, it's suspect vehicle 1 looping and working up the courage to do this. And the defense, I can already tell you, is laying out the argument that you can't prove that's the same car in all those videos. You're building a narrative by telling people that that's that same car looping around, circling, thinking about what they're going to do. So now Bryan Kohberger has worked up the will to pull away. He's leaving. And this time he's determined to stay away. It's as if he does not want to be that other person. So he doesn't want to be a killer. He's thinking twice about it. He continues on to Taylor Avenue until King Road is faint, a distant blur in his rearview mirror. He's escaping, but he cannot help himself. It's 4 a.m, and the driver turns around and returns a third time. So Brian here he's describing Brian's inner struggle with himself. He wants to kill. Oh, no, I don't want to kill. I don't want to become that guy. But he's compelled. He must kill because he's a killer at heart. That's the logic that Blum wants you to have. Brian can't avoid it. He's compelled to kill, so he returns. The white car has stopped, engine idling, on the asphalt parking bluff above King Road House. Turning off the ignition will require the strength of Hercules. It seems an impossible task. It's still not too late to flee. So now he's building the whole thing. Brian has pulled his car in to the murder scene and is just fighting this internal war to turn off the engine. And again, it's a good, vivid image, and I even feel bad repeating it over again because I'm helping reaffirm this image in some people's minds, perhaps, that that's what's happened. There's no way to prove that any of this happened. This is Howard Blum on his own coming up with a narrative so that you can vividly imagine Bryan Kohberger in that car struggling to turn the ignition off in the car and go through with what he's compelled to do because he's a killer. But he must know his hesitation is a hoax. He must understand that only the deed will silence the voices screaming like a chaos of banshees inside his head. In other words, he needs to kill, and the only thing that's going to silence the need to kill is to go kill. With that realization, self-restraint crumbles, and in an incredible moment, he finds the will. The idea has become as natural as breathing. He is committed. He turns the ignition off. The door of the white car opens. No one notices. All remains still. So now the killer is resolved. A dark figure. Now here, to his credit, he's not really saying Bryan Kohberger over and over again. And so maybe I'm being a little harsh, because he's not saying Brian did this and Brian did that. He's saying the driver, the dark figure. He's leaving it ambiguous. Now, I don't think in this book that Blum is ambiguous about it. Having said that, let me rethink this on the fly as we're doing this. He did just paint a paragraph or a chapter in 12 about an alternative suspect and did a pretty good job, sort of, laying down the idea that Jack the Cour might have been furious hot that night. Jack Showalter, the sketchy figure called the hoodie guy, may have followed the girls. And so maybe he's backing off a hair and allowing the reader to make the decision for themselves. But again, ultimately, he's already painted the picture about why Bryan Kohberger is the way that he is and has to do this. So when he's doing all of this paragraph, I think that he wants you to believe that that's who it is. A dark figure walks down the dirt incline, the ground hard with a thin coating of frost. He is heading towards the back of the house. In his gloved hand, he is gripping a leather sheath that holds a K-bar knife with a sharp 7-inch steel blade. It's a killer's weapon. Now, I don't know. In his gloved hand. I don't know how Howard Blum knows that Kohberger has a glove on, other than there was no fucking DNA in that house, so the killer had to wear a glove. Other than that one speck of touch DNA, which I'm sure that Howard Blum has to believe was an inadvertent or accidental transfer of DNA onto the knife sheath, because he's wearing gloves now and he's holding the knife as he's walking in. We don't know any of those things, but this is, again, to be fair, Howard Blum is painting what he thinks happened. I just wish he would have said, this is what I think happened. Keep in mind, there's no way for me to know that. It would have been great if he had said that, but he didn't. The sliding glass door to the kitchen is rarely locked, and tonight is no exception. The door glides open easily. So he's painting the narrative. The killer came in through the back door, the sliding back door in the back of the house. And the door slides open easily, making only a muffled sound, as slight as a sudden intake of breath, and he steps inside. Now, I'm not going to back into that. So, does he listen for a telltale noise? Does he need a moment to get accustomed to the new manner of darkness? So, Howard Blum believes the house is dark. Or is the faint glow of the neon good vibes sufficient to light the way? So, Howard Blum is telling us, in his opinion, or does he know, the house was dark. This is important, because if you're going to talk about the time frame and the killer going into a house that he's never been into before, and it's dark with maybe only a neon light lighting your way, how much can that killer know the house floor plan to walk the floors and not stumble in the darkness or whatever? So the fact that Blum is setting up this is a dark house, not a lit house. It's not like the killer can see everything. It's a dark house, maybe illuminated by a neon light, according to him. That would lead to questions about the time frame and how much the killer could see and know the floor plan. But let's put that aside for the moment. Once inside the kitchen, he proceeds up the narrow staircase to the third floor, and this is arguably telling. If he were aimless, driven only by furious emotions, he would burst forward into either of the second floor bedrooms. That's where Dylan's at and where Xana and Ethan are at. But he has a plan. He knows where he's going. He is a hunter stalking his prey. So again, now this is important. Everybody online for 2 years, it seems like, has been arguing. Different people have theories. Who was the killer going after? Was Xana the target? Many people think that Xana was the target. Now there's newer theories that are coming out that Ethan was the target, and there's those. Howard Blum and others have pointed over and over again that Maddie Mogan was the target, which is super interesting, because the ones that are getting all the traction lately are those three, not Kaylee, which is interesting, because in the early days, it indicated over and over again that Kaylee got the worst wounds out of everybody, and therefore would indicate to me and a lot of people that Kaylee was the target. But now it seems like everyone and their dog is focusing on anybody being the target other than Kaylee, which I find is super interesting. It feels like everyone's trying to change the narrative to make sure that Kaylee is just never mind. It shouldn't have happened to Kaylee. She was just collateral damage, instead of making her the target like many of us believe Kaylee was from the beginning. Another speculation. Since Kaylee no longer lives full-time in the house, his target has always been, since the madness of first crept into his thoughts, petite Maddie. So in other words, he's again telling us, because Kaylee hasn't been staying at the house recently, the killer should have not even expected Kaylee to be there. Therefore, it's important for him to point out Kaylee couldn't have been the target. It's almost as if these people are trying to make sure to paint the narrative that Kaylee couldn't have been the target. Like, it's important for them to change the details that Kaylee couldn't be because she wasn't even supposed to be there. Now, the counter to that, by the way, is, did the killer wait until Kaylee was back in the house? This is what kills me. Everything is about narrative. So his point is, Kaylee wasn't staying there, so therefore the killer wasn't coming for Kaylee. The counter to that is, the killer picked this night because Kaylee was back in the house and hadn't been. So he picked this night because Kaylee was back in the house. So take it for what it is. Whichever way you want to spin it, it's a spin. When he opens the door, he finds two girls in the bed asleep. He slashes away swiftly, savagely. Just like that, man, we just jump right into the killings. That's super weird. But anyways, he opens the door, he finds the two girls in bed asleep. He slashes away swiftly, savagely. The wounds are long and very deep. I want to get to this in a second here. It was quick, vicious work. In the single bed, the two lie dying, their bodies splayed yet touching. Their blood seeps into the mattress in a spreading red stain. Yet despite her wounds, Kaylee manages to lift herself up and, as if trying to escape, wedges herself into the far corner of the small room. The determined killer closes in, and she fights back. But all is quickly over, and her bloody body crumples to the floor. Now, this is what bothers me about this. Early on, things that I have read indicated that Kaylee received much more vicious wounds than Maddie. Maddie, it seemed to me from early writings, had been stabbed, and Kaylee, who was awake, had been gouged. Deep gouging wounds that included, on some depictions that we see online, internal organs being, she was eviscerated, internal organs being basically falling out from the deep cuts. Now, Howard Blum points that both girls got deep cuts. So whether or not Maddie got deep cuts where she was eviscerated or had gouging wounds or not, we don't know. But it sounds like to me, from early indications and from Steve Gonsalves himself, that Kaylee's wounds were of that nature, not Maddie's. Now, Howard Blum has got both the girls receiving the similar kind of thing. And at least Howard Blum admits now that Kaylee was awake and fighting back. He mentions later on that another girl was awake and fighting back. And again, early indications were to put this in the timing that they need to have it, that everybody was asleep and drunk. And so therefore it was easy for somebody to kill all these people because they were asleep and drunk. At least Howard Blum is doing the service of admitting to us that he believes that Kaylee was awake and fought back to some extent. How much she could fight back or how long that lasted, we don't know. The commotion and the smell of blood rouses the dog Murphy. Apparently the smell of blood, by the way, doesn't rouse Dylan for 8 hours or Bethany for 8 hours after the murders, even though the house would have smelled like blood, in my opinion. Now, I wasn't there. And maybe they had a bunch of windows open and being vented, but considering it's November, I'm thinking probably not. And since he talked about frost on the road as the killer walked to the house, probably not. It was probably cold, so I doubt windows were open over at a vent. And yes, dogs have better smell than human beings, but it's just interesting that he's talking about the smell of blood as how strong the smell of blood is, and it arises the nature of Murphy the dog. Dogs do have better smelling. I'm just making this as a point, because the smell of blood has been a question many people have asked. How come Dylan didn't smell blood? How come they didn't smell other smells that go along with death for 8 hours before calling 911? From the room across the hall, the dog is frantic. So again, many people have said that the dog was not in the room with Kaylee and Maddie. The dog was in the room across the hall from them. Maybe in a dog crate, maybe not. Apparently not, because many reports say the dog was running free and outside of the house when law enforcement arrived. So maybe the dog wasn't in a dog crate. So why the dog would be in the room across the hall from his owner, Kaylee, I don't know. All these are leading to a lot of questions. So downstairs, Dylan wakes. So Dylan was asleep, according to Howard Blum. I don't believe that's true. So downstairs, Dylan now wakes. I don't think she was asleep. But that's because of the text messages we know that the girls were having and the things that were going on now that we do know that maybe Howard Blum didn't know when he wrote this book, or maybe he did and he just didn't care. I don't know. Is Kaylee playing with Murphy at this time of night? She calls out with disapproval into the darkness from her bed. So there's early indications that someone, Dylan, heard a dog barking and thought, and it was said in the documents, she thought maybe Kaylee was playing with the dog. So there you go. He's now addressed that piece for us. No one answers, but Murphy has calmed in some measure. Why? I don't know. Now, some have speculated. Why did Murphy calm some? This is something worth mentioning. Some have mentioned, why did Murphy not make more of a ruckus? Why did the dog calm down? If he's seeing something happening like his owner being attacked, why did Murphy calm down? Some have argued, pure speculation. This is what I do. I'm going to tell you it's pure speculation. If Jack DeCoeur, for example, who owns that dog as well, and the dog is very familiar with Jack DeCoeur, or anyone who the dog is very familiar with, maybe somebody that the dog is familiar with could have calmed them down. That the dog seeing and smelling somebody that it was used to would have maybe calmed the dog down. I don't know that that's the case. I'm just mentioning, some people have mentioned that as a possibility, that the reason why the dog calmed down perhaps is because it was someone in the house that the dog was aware of. The killer walks down the stairwell. Now this is right here a departure. The killer walks down the stairwell. In NBC Dateline's latest hit piece, The Terrible Night on King Road, in which Howard Blum was featured, and he wrote this book, the story is that Xana was in the kitchen and heard Kaylee and Maddie being attacked, and perhaps Murphy. They didn't mention that in the Dateline piece, but Xana hears a loud commotion upstairs as the killer is killing the two women and goes up to investigate. The killer is interrupted by Xana, and he chases her down the stairs and into her room to attack and kill her in her room. That's the NBC Dateline special report. That was had featured Howard Blum in it. But in Howard Blum's book, the killer is just calmly walking downstairs. There's no talk about Xana going upstairs. So again, everyone's painting different narratives all the time about what happened in the house. Bottom line is, we don't know what happened in the house. That's the important thing to remember. We don't know. But this is now Howard Blum's spinning what happened. So you can get a mental picture that he kills the two girls very quickly and then walks downstairs to continue on, even though it's not what Dateline NBC recently said. Xana is awake. There's someone here, she cries out. There's someone here. The alarm loud enough so that from inside the bedroom across the hall, Dylan hears every word. So again, Dylan had indicated she heard something like someone saying someone's here. I don't believe she said it was screamed. She said, or yelled. I thought she said that she had heard someone say someone's here. But we'll put that aside for now, because maybe my memory is wrong on that. She opens the bedroom door and peers out. There's only darkness, and closing the door behind her, she returns to her bed. This is not the time, she decides, to make sense of things. So now they're painting the picture of Dylan's cloistered into her bedroom, not responding to somebody yelling, dog barking, all these things. NBC Dateline said it was a loud commotion upstairs. Dylan doesn't respond to all those things. She's just confused, and so she goes back to her room because now's not the time to investigate. The loud commotion and the screaming and yelling somebody's here and dog barking and that. Dylan just said, now's not the time. Now's not the time to investigate. All right, but Ethan, now here's a departure. Here's a departure from The Terrible Night on King Road that just came out, which featured Howard Blum in it. In that episode, if I remember correctly, and I feel like I just watched this last week, if I remember correctly, they stated the new details that Ethan was asleep in the bed and that the killer dispatched him with one major artery cut and then carved up Ethan's legs afterwards. That's what they said on Dateline. It was new, shocking details. Nobody had said that before. In fact, I had been told that Ethan was attacked, or I had believed in a mental picture early on that Ethan was attacked first, that Ethan was probably awake. Ethan may have confronted the killer in the hallway and was attacked in the hallway and had fallen on the floor, Ethan did, blocking the door. That's what I had been led to believe. And so I was surprised when I heard the Dateline special that came out just recently featuring Howard Blum that Ethan was in his bed sleeping and that the killer quickly took him out. Now, here's this account from Howard Blum, written before that Dateline piece. Ethan has emerged from Xana's room. So, and now in the book, Ethan's awake. In the Dateline NBC special recently, Ethan's asleep in the bed. Suddenly, he's standing face to face with the intruder, dressed entirely in black, a black mask pulled up high on the ridge of his nose. Ethan is 6'4", powerful, and an athlete. The killer does not hesitate. He lashes out without compunction, and an arcing blow slices through Ethan's neck, catching the jugular. This is details I don't believe has been made public. I don't know where that came from. Is Howard Blum just guessing, or does Howard Blum know? Did Howard Blum talk to somebody who saw autopsy reports? Because I don't know that it has been made public exactly that Ethan had his neck or his jugular slashed. But that's a detail that Howard Blum has. His body starts to topple and then falls in the doorway with a flat thud. So he's got Ethan falling in the doorway. This was an early indication that the door was blocked, that Dylan couldn't open the door, that when someone came later on, they had a problem opening the door because there was a body blocking the door. This looks like Howard Blum's painting that's Ethan's body. Later on, we're going to find out, after this book was written, we're going to find out that Dylan saw Xana laying on the floor and that Ethan was still in the bed. So again, the details continue to change on this story. It doesn't seem consistent, but what seems to be coming out in court documents is that Xana was on the floor, Dylan saw Xana on the floor, and that Ethan was probably in the bed. But originally, I'd heard accounts like this, that Ethan probably surprised the killer first and was attacked and killed and dropped on the floor, and that Xana was in the bed. So the details here are getting very confused. And so again, to be fair, when the jury hears this, they're probably going to, at some point, just put away everything that they've heard ahead of time and just listen to what the new story is and just focus on the new story. But they'll be predisposed because they have certain feelings about who the killer is based on things that they've heard. But they'll probably listen for the first time and go, okay, whatever I've heard, I'm just going to kind of forget, and we're just going to, what do they tell me happened now? All right. And then it continues on. Does the killer crouch over his victim and continue his attack? Question mark. If so, the assault is unnecessary. Ethan is already dead. That was a detail, again, added in the Dateline NBC. Ethan died very quickly from an arterial cut of some kind. When they add in the NBC Dateline that his legs were carved up, some have theorized that the artery that was cut wasn't the jugular, it was the inside femoral artery inside the leg. Some people in prison are taught to go for the inner arterial femoral artery inside the thigh. And also somebody, for example, that might be trained in knife fighting in the military might be taught to go for the femoral artery inside the thigh. So those two things could be reconciled. Meaning that Ethan was dispatched very quickly with one cut to an artery, and that his legs were carved up if what happened was the killer went for the femoral artery inside the thigh. But that would indicate that whoever did it was trained in knife fighting and knew that going for the inside the groin artery is a quick way to dispatch somebody. So the question becomes, was Dylan slashed in the jugular and then the killer carved up his legs for some reason? Or is the statement an artery was cut and his legs were carved answered by the person cut the femoral artery? All right, so that's just some things to keep in mind, some things that have always been in the back of my mind. When I heard that Dateline NBC piece about the one artery cut and carving up his legs, I said, oh, is it possible the person went for the femoral artery? Xana is sobbing. The plaintive sound rouses Dylan again. So she hears crying because Dylan said, I heard some crying. So Dylan said, hey, I heard the dog barking. Hey, I heard someone say someone's here. Hey, I heard some crying. So Blum is working all of these elements in from the early statements of Dylan to the police over the course of several interviews. She opens the bedroom door a crack and once again peers. The darkness reveals nothing. So again, it's a dark house. She can't see anything. But the killer apparently can move about this house very efficiently. Anyways, let's put that aside. The killer is now close enough to Xana to see that she is trembling. I don't know where he gets that detail. Despite everything that is raging in him, he selects his words with deliberate care. It's okay. I'm going to help you, he says. Now, another bone of contention. Prosecution has seemed to indicate in multiple things that the statement that Dylan said she heard the words, it's okay, I'm here to help you, may have been something that was on TikTok. Xana was on TikTok on her phone. The prosecution has indicated that the words, the phrase that Dylan said she heard, it's okay. And I believe Dylan said, and again, the details change every single day on the narrative. So please forgive me if I'm remembering it wrong, because every time this story is told, it changes just a little. So if I'm hearing it wrong, or if I'm remembering it wrong, maybe cut me a little slack. This story has been told different ways over and over again. I thought she heard somebody quiet quietly say or whisper, "It's okay, I'm here to help you." I don't know how Dylan would hear a whisper. That's what I remember hearing. And then later on, the prosecution indicated that there was an indication that that statement, "It's okay, I'm here to help you," may have been from TikTok, because Xana was on TikTok. And maybe they found, I don't know, this part's speculation on my part, maybe they found the TikTok video where someone says, "It's okay, I'm here to help you," that was on a TikTok video, and because she was on TikTok, they was like, I'm not sure the killer said, "It's okay, I'm here to help you." Maybe this was from this TikTok video that was playing on TikTok around that time. It is a lie. He had only come to help himself. He raises his knife and attacks. From behind her partially open door, Dylan hears the killer speak. Nothing is making sense. She closes the door and retreats back to her bed. Okay, wait, put that aside. Just put that aside. Xana, 5'3" and 113 pounds, is fighting for her life. This is something we've heard. Xana put up as one indication of the coroner said. Xana put up one hell of a fight. So Ethan, who's 6 foot something, didn't put up much of a fight, even though early indications are Ethan had defensive wounds, meaning he was awake. And Howard Blum puts Ethan as awake and meeting the killer in the hallway or the doorway. Yet, on Dateline's NBC piece with Howard Blum, Ethan's killed while he's sleeping in his bed. So there would be no defensive wounds. Which one is it, people? Does Ethan have defensive wounds or not? If he was in his bed sleeping and just got killed in one cut, there should be no defensive wounds. If Ethan has defensive wounds, he wasn't in the bed sleeping. So he plunges the knife deep. This is into Xana again and again. She crumples to the floor. Then he steps over Ethan's body and walks out of the room. So now Blum has clearly got Xana and Ethan on the floor of the bedroom that he has to step over to exit. And keep in mind, again, the Howard Blum appearance on the latest Dateline NBC piece seems to indicate that Ethan was in the bed sleeping and isn't on the floor. So now we've got, according to Howard Blum in his book written before that Dateline piece, Ethan and Xana both on the floor, and that the killer has to step over them. Later we'll also be told that their bodies were blocking the door, and the door was shut, and it was hard to open the door because their bodies were on the floor. Again, the details of this, while minute and to some people's mind, change all the time. So we just don't know what happened. But he's going to paint this big piece. And I want to point out another thing. The Dateline, and this is going long, the Dateline NBC piece also told us a new piece of information. The killer was apparently exhausted after killing Xana and sat down in a chair in the room and left a bloody print behind. Not according to the book that Howard Blum's writing. Howard Blum tells us the killer just kills Xana and walks out, steps over their bodies and walks out of the room. There's no part in this book about the killer sitting down and sitting on a chair. That was a new detail that shocked a lot of people, including myself, when we heard it on Dateline NBC. Then shortly after the Dateline NBC thing, Stephen Hippler, the judge in the case, came out and was furious about somebody leaking information to the press, and that clearly somebody had talked about confidential information. So does that indicate that that is true, that the killer sat down in a chair inside the room? Because Hippler's pissed about something. So was it Hippler pissed about the manner in which Ethan was killed, that he was in the bed? Was it about Ethan's legs being carved up? Was it about the killer sitting down? All those details are different than what Blum is saying right here. And Hippler's pissed about whoever leaked that to the press. But what exactly was leaked to the press, we don't know. We don't know if it was just cell phone pictures from Brian Koberger that he's pissed about, or if it's about search records that Brian did that he's pissed about, or if it's the details of the actual crime that were leaked that pissed Hippler off. Either way, the book and the Dateline piece don't match, and Howard Blum's in both of them. So which one of the Howard Blum versions do we want to go with? So Dylan now, so here we go. He steps over the bodies and he goes, walks out of the room. His gait is unhurried. I don't know how he knows that, but Howard Blum tells us. There were 4 of them. Oh yeah, he knows this because Dylan said the killer calmly walked past her. So his gait's unhurried. Dylan, okay, so there were 4 of them, and he never hesitated. So I'm getting this out of order. Let's talk about this. So he just killed Xana and Ethan. He steps over their bodies. His gait is unhurried. There were 4 of them, and he never hesitated. He did what he had to do because he's compelled to kill, remember. And he must feel exhilarated. He must feel exhilarated because he's excited. He just did what he came here to do. Anyways. He continues back towards the slider door in the kitchen. His self-absorption is total. He never notices that Dylan is standing in the doorway, the bedroom door flung open, and he is staring directly, and she is staring directly at him as if in a trance. Now, this is important for me to point out. Many of us have asked how it is that if the killer comes in there to kill that night, Dylan is allowed to just look at the killer eye to eye, make eye contact with him, get in a frozen shock phase, as she said, and the killer just calmly walks past her and leave. The answer, and I have said it myself, could be, did the killer not see her? Did she see him, but the killer didn't see her? She indicates seeing the killer face to face, seeing his eyes, or whatever. Is it possible the killer didn't see her? That could explain why Dylan is alive. Also, the killer may not have known that Bethany was in the basement. That also could explain why Bethany Funk is alive, because the killer didn't even know there was somebody in the basement. So, if you, playing devil's advocates with my own devil's advocates channel, one answer to why Dylan wasn't killed and Bethany wasn't killed is, one, the killer didn't know Bethany was in the basement, and two, the killer didn't see Dylan as he walked past her. That's a possibility. But most of us are questioning Dylan's story entirely, and her coming eye to eye with the killer, and yet he just leaves her alone and walks out the house, has been part of the speculation about what's really going on here. But there is an answer, potentially, that the killer didn't see her. And that's what Blum's going to say, because it makes more sense. It protects the narrative. The killer must not have seen her, otherwise he would have killed her too. And I kind of agree. Unless, of course, the killer wasn't there for her. He was there for Kaylee and her best friends. Which would explain why Dylan would be a survivor. Or, to be fair, I'm going on a side tangent, if Dylan was involved, let the killer in, knows the killer, and that somehow there's an involvement of Dylan, also could explain why Dylan was left alone. So all of these things are theories to think about in the back of your mind. She sees a man dressed in all black, a black mask reaching up high on his face. As she processes the moment, she decides he is about 5'10", maybe taller, not muscular, but well put together like an athlete. For some reason, her eyes fix on his bushy eyebrows. I want to point out, by the way, eyewitness testimony is horrendous. I am horrendous with eyewitness testimony. I have told people what I've seen in a crime and been horrendously wrong. It is notoriously true that eyewitness testimony is the worst because people see things wrong all the time. But he's got it painted out, and the prosecution is going to rely heavily that she has identified Kohberger in many ways. His height, his build, his eyebrows. These are really important. Eyewitness testimony is horrendous, but it's important for the prosecution's narrative, and thus Howard Blum's depiction of the murders, that she's got a really good in her drunken state and her scared state of a killer being, well, she doesn't know it's a killer because Dylan supposedly didn't see anything happen or hear anything other than a dog barking. In that state, though, she's able to give a very accurate, which they're going to stick to. Even though she says later on, I was drunk, I'm not sure if I even saw it, I'm not sure if I dreamt the whole thing. They're gonna try to bypass that and use this very distinct, he was about 5'10", muscular, bushy eyebrows. That's going to be important for them to focus on, that part, and not her saying, I'm not sure that it even happened, I may have dreamt the whole thing, I was really drunk, I can't remember. Maybe I saw only one eye, maybe it was two eyes, I don't know, I was really drunk. That was said multiple times, but they're going to focus on this. I'm guaranteeing you're going to focus on this in the courtroom. She identified him as 5'10", athletic built, and bushy eyebrows. She stares at him, a visitor, an intruder. She doesn't understand what just happened, and she is extremely tired. She closes the door of her room and goes to bed, the blanket pulled up high. That's horseshit. Dylan Mortensen did not go to bed. She was on her phone texting nearly all night long. She was texting with Bethany in the basement about how scared she was. Bethany told her to come run to her room. This is not true. Dylan did not go back to her room and go back to bed. But that was one of the stories that's been circulating forever. That explains why the girls didn't call 911 for 8 hours, because they fell asleep and they woke up hours later and they didn't know what happened in the house. The important narrative for them is that Dylan went back to sleep. That is not true. We know that's not true. There's been all kinds of documents been released by the defense saying, let's talk about the actual text messages. It's verified the girls were texting people, texting each other, texting family and friends that morning. They were not asleep as they said they were. So that part has turned out to be absolutely not true, but Howard Blum still got it. She just went back to bed. Did the killer see Dylan? We don't know. Does he spare her in a sudden act of kindness? We don't know. Or, I'm adding the we do not know. If you're watching on screen, you know, you can see. Or at the wild moment, is he incapable of seeing anything? It remains a mystery. So at least Howard Blum's saying, is it that the killer just didn't see Dylan, or did he purposely leave her alone for some reason we don't know? So great, good on Howard Blum. At least he's telling us there's a possibility the killer saw her and chose not to kill her, but we don't know why. He retraces his steps, making his way back up the hill. I want to stop here. No talk in Howard Blum's discussion talks about the killer stripping off all of his clothes, getting naked, putting all of his bloody clothes in a bag so that no blood gets tracked out of the house of the victims or himself or whatever out to his car. None of that talk. So he's just got him walking back out to his car. If he had just murdered 4 people with a fixed bladed knife, cutting arteries, there would be blood everywhere, including what they indicated in Dateline as some kind of bloody print in a chair as he sat down. So it seems a foregone conclusion the killer is covered in blood. Yet he walks out of the house, and as far as we all know, no blood of the victims is tracked out of the house at all. No DNA of the victims is found in Kohberger's car. No blood of the victims is found anywhere in Kohberger's possessions, in his house, his apartment, anywhere. So the question becomes, at what, and so the answer for people who believe that Kohberger's guilty, the answer is, well, he stripped out of his clothes and put it in a bag. Okay, where's that in Bloomberg's argument? No, he just walks out and retraces his steps and head back to a car. Howard Blum totally ignores how blood isn't tracked everywhere when this happens, nor does he explain that the killer gets out of his clothes. And you've got another problem, by the way. Let me just address some problems that I've been working through. If the killer stripped out of his clothes, I told you before, and I've said it a million times, the human body sheds 30 to 40,000 skin cells every minute. So if you're going to say the reason why that killer's DNA is not all over the house is because he was wearing a full body suit and gloves and such and such and such and such, and then tell me that he stripped off all those clothes before exiting the house and put them in a bag, now he's naked and shedding 30 to 40,000 skin cells every minute. So you still have a problem, people who want to insist that, well, the killer took off their clothes, that's why the victim's blood wasn't tracked out to the car. Okay, so now you want to tell me that the killer, who you believe is Brian Kohberger, stripped off his clothes and went naked, but none of his skin cells, 30 to 40,000 of which would have sloughed off in at least 1 minute, aren't left at the crime scene. You can't have it both ways. Well, you can, because most people who find Brian Kohberger guilty will have it both ways. They will tell you the killer left nothing behind, and it doesn't, there's something not adding up, but I don't know what it is. Other than there's indications by some documents that the killer or killers spent time cleaning up the crime scene a bit. That might explain some things. Might. It's still very confusing. All right, he traces his steps, making his way back up the hill. He's transformed. He has become what he had to become. In a little more than 8 minutes, 10 at most, he has killed 4 people. This is important too. I want to back up. Again, the official timeline has the car last seen in motion at 4:07 a.m. It sees the car speeding off from the crime scene at 4:20 a.m. That is a crime window of 13 minutes. If you believe that the person who came into the house killed 4 people by themselves, it's 13 minutes. I'm getting the 13 minutes from 4:07 when the car was last seen in motion, and 4:20 when we see the car speeding off. That's 13 minutes if I do my math right. I've always said that you've got to account for time walking into the house and walking back out of the house and some other things, and so really that time frame is somewhere around 8 to 10 minutes, and that's exactly word for word what Howard Blum says. In a little more than 8 minutes, 10 at most, he killed 4 people. He gets back into the white car and drives off at a faint light as the faint light of a new day begins to filter through the lead gray sky, and the blood spreads in a thin red rivulets through the house on King Road. So that's it. Chapter 13. Howard Blum has depicted a version of the events that's different than the version of events that he's featured talking about in the Terrible Night on King Road on Dateline NBC, a different version of events than many of us heard in the early stages of the investigation, a different set of events than many of us have heard details about 6 weeks from Sunday. Everything's different about this version. Every time someone tells the story, it's a little different, and he's also telling us exactly what Kohberger is thinking. While he did refer to him as the driver, he clearly is depicting that Kohberger is on his way back to Pullman, as the prosecution states, and all those things. So he's lining. He may not have said it in this chapter, but he clearly believes it's Kohberger. It seems to me. He's reiterating that now he's on his way back. Right. This is what the thing is. So take it for a grain of salt. This was really long. I don't know how long it was. I didn't time myself on it, but it feels like it's been a good hour and 20 minutes. So we went maybe a little long on this, but I just wanted to cover this chapter almost word for word. We read the entire chapter. Still covered under fair use because I stopped regularly and gave my opinions and my thoughts and added details to it. So even though I read you the entire chapter word for word, it's still covered under fair use in my opinion. And I would also give a plug for the book. Please go out and buy a copy of this book so that you can give the author his props for writing the book and not rip off his intellectual property. But again, everything that I'm doing a book review on this, even though I'm covering massive swaths of the book, is covered under fair use. So there you have it. Have a good day. We'll continue to plug through this. I'll try this week to get at least one more chapter, if not two, so we can try to push this book along. There's a lot of meat coming. It may be actually slow down. I thought we were going to speed up in this book. It may actually be slowing down because now we're getting into the details. Howard Blum's got chapters that deal with forensics and things like this. So those chapters are going to slow us down, I'm sure. So to counter that, I'm just going to have to do more of these, but maybe of a longer length. Have a good day. I'm giving you a break.